Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, he is on a one-man mission to replace politicians with patriots. His incredible journey just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, there used to be a formula in politics. You went to law school, became a lawyer, you'd start on your city council, and then you would end up going to Washington eventually. But these days, they're electing people who have never held elected office before. It tells me that there is an undercurrent of, what are we doing with these career politicians all the time? To talk about that, Robert West, he's the author of the 5-Star Plan. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for being here.
All right. I want to start with the very early days of this country. So there were not career politicians when the founding fathers imagined this country.
Not at all. They viewed it as a public service, like jury duty. Mm-hmm. And it's something you're willing to do as a citizen. It's not something you want to do. It's something you try to avoid as much as possible. Those positions were not paid. They were volunteer, and a lot of politicians out west, your county judges and such, are still not paid. It's just an honor for the people to pick you to do that job, and you do it out of community service. And just like if somebody really, really, really wants to be on that particular jury, they should never be on that jury. Mm-hmm. If someone has this burning desire and will sacrifice everything for this congressional office or this Senate seat, they should never be allowed anywhere near the levers of power.
And there have been a lot of good men and good women that went to Washington to change Washington, and then Washington ends up changing them.
Absolutely. I tell everybody, there's no way. If you spend 12, 18 years in Washington, there's not an apple in the world that won't rot in that amount of time. If I went to D.C. for 20 years, I would rot. The culture just says this is acceptable, everybody's doing it, and it gets to be normal. And eventually you don't see it anymore.
Yes, let's talk about your 5-Star Plan. You've got a couple of books now. We're going to put the cover up on the screen. Tell us about your book.
Okay, this is the newest one. When the first one came out, we got a lot of people seated, and they took a lot of power. We seated close to 1,500 precinct chairs across Texas out of 9,500 and some change. So we have a huge impact on the GOP. But then I started getting these calls from elected officials and precinct chairs and said, all these problems are so complex. Oh my God, how do we deal with them? So I wrote this new book, and it lists up 12 or 13 problems and possible solutions that I came up with. Other people are going to come up with better ones. And then it lists who is responsible for this. Who's primarily responsible for voting in Texas? Well, that's your county commissioners. They can go back to paper ballot anytime they feel like it. Who's responsible for the border? That would be either the governor declaring an invasion, which he's been talking about since he became governor, or it would be the president of the United States. And this is how you contact them. This is how you influence them.
And we were talking at the beginning of the show that there is kind of an undercurrent in this country of, it seems like it doesn't matter if you elect a Republican or a Democrat. It just there's a sameness about what happens in D.C.
Exactly, and not just in D.C. I'll give you an example much closer to home. So 67% of Democrats support getting rid of taxpayer-funded lobbying. That's where the schools spend money to send someone down to Austin to convince Austin to allow them to raise your taxes higher so they can spend more money next year, ask them to raise their taxes even more. I don't want my tax money being spent for that. If I wanted my taxes raised, I could contact my state representative. So 67% of Democrats doesn't like this. 80-something% of Republicans don't like it. 254 counties in Texas. The total number of counties that have listened to either side of the voters is 0. Doesn't matter if they're Democrat, doesn't matter if they're Republican run, they don't care. They like it the way it is.
You were telling me right before the show the origin of the word lobbyist.
Oh, yes, okay. So back in the day, when Congress met, if you were a farmer or a shipbuilder or whatever, and you had something that you wanted to push on Congress or a law you wanted passed or repealed, they'd gather up their money, they'd pick their best speaker, and they'd put them on a horseback, and they'd ride into D.C. from across the country. And they couldn't just barge into the Capitol and cost these congressmen, so they had to wait in the hotel lobby. And they became known as lobbyists.
Lobbyists. And lobbyists, it's become a big problem because money really speaks, doesn't it?
It is, but when people say lobbyists, they want to exempt the ones we like. Mm-hmm. So the NRA have lobbyists. You know, the ACLU has lobbyists. You can be for or against these organizations, but lobbying is no more than you're presenting your case. When I make a phone call to my state senator or my state rep, I'm actually lobbying them. And it's not illegal for me to do it, and it costs money to pick up the phone. So it's not the lobbying, it's the person involved. Nobody can buy something if it isn't for sale.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about your podcast. And as we pull up the page on your website and we scroll down, you are just a very prolific podcaster. Tell us how you come up with the themes for the shows.
A lot of times I have no clue. I'll get on the camera and even if I have a plan, sometimes it'll just go wonky and go sideways. But certain things grab my attention. When the legislature meets and they start writing rules for the political parties, the elected officials have a House Bill 4636 right now that's going to take all the power from the county committees and give it to the county chair. Well, some counties are run that way. Some counties have very weak chairs. They write their own rules. They're a private organization. And I looked at that and I said, the elected have no business writing the rules for a private organization. We have a freedom of association. And it would be no different than if they said they passed a rule that the churches have to pass the collection plate left to right instead of right to left. They have no business in that.
Yes. Let's talk about your speaking career. We've got some pictures from your website of you out speaking. What kind of groups do you like to speak to?
Well, I get invited to any group I'll go speak to. This is We the People of Allen. They actually took over the GOP in Collin County from the elites. When they got to, that's me, I think, talking to Valerie Swanson, which was a very interesting exchange. I didn't think I'd sell any books there. But there's TTP, there's True Texas Project, any group that I can get in front of. Even if I don't completely agree with them, I'll speak to a Texas group because they do care and they're involved and they're active. Convention of States, I held a training for them and encouraged them to, instead of just lobbying, take these precinct chair positions. And they filled 250 or more precinct chair positions just asking their volunteers.
Let's talk about people getting involved. I mean, I hear a lot of people complaining about the process or complaining about, the current administration, but they won't vote. I mean, we're in the middle of a vote right now, and what is it like just a small percentage of voters actually vote?
Primaries, you're looking at about 17% of the people show up. And if you don't vote in the primaries in Texas, you might as well just pack it up. Because once the primaries are over, you have a choice between tuberculosis and cancer.
Wow. That's an interesting way to describe it. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left. Final thoughts. What would you like to leave people with?
That you have more power than you know. That you absolutely have all the power in the world, and they are scared to death that you'll figure it out. When I traveled around the world, I saw how they trained baby elephants. And if you're not familiar, they'll put a very rough ankle bracelet on it with a chain, and baby elephants are very, very communal animals, and they'll cry and they'll scream and they'll pull on that chain and they'll bleed, and they want to get back to mama. And those scars will be on its leg the rest of its life. But when they finally figure out that it's a lot of work and a lot of pain and they're not accomplishing anything, they'll lay down. And as soon as they lay down, the trainers will come get them. They're trained. They will never again pull on the chain the rest of their lives.
Wow.
And if you feel bad for the baby elephant, feel bad for the voters because they've been convinced they're powerless, and they're not. They have all the power in the world. They've been paying for everything since they started paying taxes. They have a voice. I was trading dollars for hours for 30 years, and when the lockdown happened, I wrote a book. That's all I could think of to do, and then I went out and started speaking. I said, if I'm the only person in Texas trying to change this, I'm going to do the best I can do. And here we are.
Wow, that's a great way to end the show. And we're also going to leave you with the website, which is the5starplan.com. Robert West, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for now. We'll see you next time.